how every civilization insists it has some glorious golden age where people supposedly lived with honor, dignity, and a deep respect for tradition? Yeah, that's usually historian code for there was at least one absolutely horrifying custom that nobody wants to put on the tourism brochure. Like, sure, the temples were beautiful, the poetry was incredible, but then somewhere in the fine print you'll find, oh, by the way, this institution quietly destroyed thousands of lives for centuries. Tiny detail. Today we're looking at 5 historical systems where religion, culture, or plain old social engineering somehow managed to convince entire communities that forcing women into lifelong sexual exploitation was actually a respectable tradition. Because apparently, if you attach enough rituals to something, people stop asking uncomfortable questions. Human civilization really does have the software update schedule of Internet Explorer. Number 5. The Devadasi System. Now, before anyone starts typing an angry essay in the comments, yes, the original idea behind the Devadasi tradition in parts of India wasn't necessarily prostitution. That's kind of the tragic part. The word literally means servant of God. Young girls, sometimes before they even hit puberty, were ceremonially dedicated to a deity, often in Hindu temples. Originally, especially around the 6th to 10th centuries, many Devadasis held respected positions. They performed classical dance, music, maintained temple rituals, and some were remarkably educated compared to the average person at the time. As royal patronage declined between the 16th and 19th centuries, temple finances collapsed. Wealthy patrons and local elites increasingly treated Devadasis as sexual property rather than religious servants. Instead of marrying, many were expected to provide sexual services to influential men while remaining permanently dedicated to the temple. Real convenient arrangement there. Imagine inventing a religious loophole where you simultaneously avoid marriage responsibilities while still demanding exclusive access to someone's body. That's like creating a premium subscription model for human exploitation. The practice became especially associated with poverty because families from lower castes sometimes dedicated daughters hoping the temple would provide security. Spoiler alert, it generally didn't. Modern India has outlawed the dedication of Devadasis through several state laws beginning in the late 20th century, although illegal cases still occasionally surface, because banning something and actually eliminating it are apparently two separate achievements. Speaking of religion getting creatively interpreted, Number 4. Sacred prostitution. Ah, yes. Probably one of the most controversial topics in ancient history, because historians have been arguing about it harder than Star Wars fans argue over the prequels. For centuries, many scholars believed temples in places like ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, and parts of the Eastern Mediterranean required women to perform ritual sex as part of religious worship. Ancient Greek historian Herodotus famously claimed that every Babylonian woman had to visit the temple of Ishtar once and have intercourse with a stranger, which sounds dramatic. Modern historians have spent decades questioning whether Herodotus either misunderstood local customs, exaggerated everything for readership, or basically invented the historical equivalent of clickbait. Congratulations, Herodotus. You may have pioneered engagement farming 24 centuries before social media. That said, temple sexuality certainly existed in some forms across parts of the ancient Near East. Religious ceremonies involving fertility cults, priestesses, and symbolic sexuality are well documented. What remains disputed is whether organized institutional prostitution on the massive scale described by classical writers actually existed. History can be annoying like that. Sometimes the evidence is crystal clear. Other times it's just two broken tablets, one guy with a bias, and an archaeologist saying, well, maybe? So the real historical story is actually more interesting than the myth because it shows how one sensational account managed to shape public perception for over 2,000 years. That's some elite misinformation longevity. Number 3. Trokosi. Now we're heading to parts of present-day Ghana, Togo, and Benin. Trokosi, which roughly translates to something like wife of the gods in parts of the Yeve language, is one of those traditions where the stated purpose somehow sounds spiritual until you examine it for more than 12 seconds. If a family committed a crime or supposedly angered the gods, they could send a young virgin girl to a shrine as compensation. The girl herself hadn't done anything. Wrong family, skill issue. Once dedicated, she often served the shrine priest for years, sometimes decades. In many documented cases, she worked without pay, performed domestic labor, agricultural work, and was subjected to sexual exploitation, with children born from these relationships belonging to the shrine community. Imagine receiving a prison sentence because your uncle stole a goat 15 years ago. Actually, don't imagine that. It's depressing. Human rights organizations campaigned heavily against the practice during the late 20th century. Ghana criminalized ritual servitude in 1998, and many shrines officially released women held under the system, although activists say isolated cases have continued. Turns out changing laws is easier than changing traditions people have followed for generations. Number 2. Jogini and Mathama. If the Devadasi system had an unfortunately persistent sequel, this would be it. The Jogini and Mathama traditions developed in parts of southern India, particularly in states like Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. Young girls, again often from marginalized communities, were ceremonially dedicated to local deities. Notice a pattern? If your historical institution keeps recruiting children instead of consenting adults, maybe your HR department deserves a visit from literally everyone. Unlike conventional marriage, these women could never marry another man because they were considered spiritually married to the deity. Conveniently, that didn't stop influential men from exploiting them sexually. Funny how that works. Many Joginis spent their lives trapped by poverty, social stigma, and economic dependence. Even after legal bans beginning in the 1980s and 1990s, rehabilitation proved incredibly difficult because escaping the ceremony didn't magically provide housing, education, or employment. Turns out, "you're free now" isn't especially helpful when society simultaneously refuses to accept you. Who could have guessed? And finally, number 1, Kisang, with an honorable or dishonorable mention of Nepal's Badi community. Let's start with Korea. Kisang were highly trained female entertainers during the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties. They studied poetry, dance, music, painting, etiquette, and conversation. The most talented could influence politics, write literature, and become respected cultural figures. So far, this sounds like historical finishing school. Here's the catch. Most Kisang belonged to the Chonmin class, one of the lowest social classes in Korea. Their legal status was hereditary, meaning daughters often inherited the profession. While many primarily entertained through artistic performance, others were expected to provide sexual services to elite clients, depending on time period and circumstance. So imagine becoming fluent in poetry, mastering musical instruments, memorizing hundreds of classical works, and society still says, "Cool." Unfortunately, your birth certificate says, "No upward mobility." Outstanding system. Now, the Badi community in western Nepal has a different but equally heartbreaking history. Historically marginalized and denied land ownership and stable employment, many Badi families became economically dependent on prostitution over generations. Unlike the ritual systems we've discussed, this wasn't primarily justified through temple dedication, but through entrenched poverty, caste discrimination, and lack of alternatives. It's the depressing reminder that sometimes you don't even need religion to trap people. Economic desperation works just fine. Thankfully, many women from the Badi community today actively campaign for education, employment, and equal rights, challenging stereotypes that have followed their families for generations. Because despite everything we've talked about today, history isn't just a record of terrible systems. It's also a record of people refusing to stay inside them, which is admittedly a much cooler ending than whatever Herodotus was trying to sell.